So many of you again, and there's some new names of people I haven't seen yet on this lecture series. Welcome. I'm super glad that you're all here. My name is Shannon Gilmore. I'm the executive director of the Lincoln County Historical Association. I'm the one who's been sending you all those emails and inviting you to this talk. I'm thrilled that you're here. We are in the middle of our 2026 online winter lecture series. It's been really a lot of fun. We've covered a number of topics, and tonight we'll be diving into stories of Mainers in Company D of the Third Maine Infantry in the Civil War. And I just had to learn how to say that. I apologize. In some of the promotional materials, I might have said that wrong because I don't think I knew the difference between, Company D and some of the other words one might use to describe them. Anyway, before we begin, I do want to thank our series sponsor, J. Edward Knight Insurance. Their longstanding commitment, and I'm talking, well over 100 years of longstanding commitment to our community, makes this series possible. Really mean it. We couldn't do this without their support and without your support. Even a small donation makes a difference. These lectures are designed to be free, and we very much mean that. You're welcome to be here regardless of whether or not you've made a donation or ever will make a donation. But if it is something that's in the cards for you and you'd like to support our work, we'd be thrilled. Donations of all amounts of money are welcome and truly add up and make a difference. And I can tell you that as the person who sits at the desk and opens the envelopes when the mail comes in, even a $5 check will make me smile. So thank you if that's something you'd like to consider. And either way, I hope you enjoy this experience. I want to briefly let you know what we have coming up because we're getting ready to shift gears. We've had a wonderful series so far. We've had a lot of folks sign up. It's been super fun. So we're not going to stop, but we are going to shift a little bit from our open online lecture series to what we call members forums. And members forums will start next week. What we do in members forum is, first of all, these are talks that are designed to be open to members of the organization. We are membership based. Membership starts at $25 per person, and it will include access to these online talks. It also includes unlimited admission to our 3 museums in the summer, which I feel like is well worth it. I hope you think so too. So if you'd like to become a member and you're not, head over to our website and join as a member. What we'll do during that lecture series is we will be looking at topics that are a little closer to home. Next week, we'll be looking at the story of Mildred Burridge, who was the founder of LCHA, and the art that she made for Kenneth Roberts' books, which is something that I didn't really even know about until I started hearing about this from Martha Frank, who will be our speaker. In other weeks, we'll be looking at other items related to the LCHA collection or people related to the collection, and it will be a lot of fun. This is tonight. I'm going to mute. There's a little feedback. I'm going to mute a couple of people. Great. And speaking of muted, as far as tonight goes, we have a few housekeeping requests, and one is that you please remain muted throughout the lecture so we don't hear the feedback of the background noise behind you or chatter or whatever is going on in your home. It's not that we don't want to hear from you, it's just that there are going to be far too many people on this talk to have our microphones on. So with that in mind, you should be able to find a little chat box at the bottom of your screen. And when you go to that little chat box, then you should type questions in throughout the presentation, and I'll be happy to read them to our speaker. This lecture is also being recorded, by the way. I wanted to mention that. If you need to look at it again later because you missed something, you'll have an opportunity to watch that later. Okay, housekeeping done, and now it is time to introduce our speaker tonight. George F. Snell III describes himself as a former journalist and communications and digital media consultant. And he'll tell you, and he said this to me, he is not a historian. But after talking with him about his research, I can tell you that the work he's done has been very careful, very thorough, and very thoughtful. I'll also tell you, when I first heard about his work, I was sort of like, oh, ho hum, this is not really my thing because I'm not interested in the Civil War, which I know as a history person that might not come across right, but I'm just more interested in social history. So, I thought, details of battle, that doesn't really do it for me. This isn't my thing. But I started to look into the work that that George Snell does. And I found myself completely drawn in because he hooked me with the storytelling of the people who were in the Company D. He has a gift for bringing the past to life, and he has a gift for making these stories interesting, even for someone who thinks they're not going to be interested. So that's why I'm especially excited to bring him here tonight because I think that you'll also be hooked. He's got a great podcast. It's a terrific listen. I think he'll tell you a little bit about it. And I'm just thrilled that he's here. So thank you so much, George. I'm going to pass it off to you. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Shannon. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the invitation to speak here this evening. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I thought we'd start the evening. Here's my plan on how we will approach the discussion this evening. We'll talk a little bit about my great-great-grandfather and his experiences during the Civil War, and then we'll discuss his unit, which is Company D of the Third Maine Infantry. And then I'm going to share two of my favorite stories from our first season of the podcast about Alfred S. Merrill and the Kennerson brothers. Then I'll talk a little bit about learnings from a project like this, and then I'll take your questions. But I also, that said, please feel free to ask questions along the way. In the box, I'll pause and ask Shannon if there are any, and I'll be happy to answer them as we go along. And I will also say that I'm getting over a cold, so I might pause every now and then to take a drink of water. But thank you again for being here. So let me introduce myself. Like I said before, I am the great-great-grandson of Corporal Charles F. Snell. I'm a former journalist, and I bring a journalist's perspective to this project. I was also a communications consultant for many years. I am now the producer and the host of Company D, a narrative history podcast that I launched in September. Finished 10 episodes in season one. We just wrapped up, scheduling season two to launch sometime in the spring of 2026 with 10 more episodes. The plan is for 5 seasons, 50 stories, but we'll see what happens after the end of season two. And our mission is a simple one. Preserving these almost forgotten stories of the individual soldiers from Company D. So this is Charles F. Snell. He enlisted as a private and became a corporal, and he is the genesis of the Company D podcast that I started with my dad. So my father and I started doing a genealogy together, cobbling together our family tree, trying to discover the secrets to our origins of our family. It was a great way for us to connect together. My dad died in 2019. And one of my favorite stories about my dad when we started this project was that he always insisted that we were German and Dutch. And it turns out that we're neither. We're English and Irish. We have this little sliver of Dutch heritage through Suriname, South America, but that's kind of a story for another time. But through all this, gathering all these stories about our family, I kept coming back to Charles and his story. So Charles F. Snell was the youngest of 7 children. He was likely an oops baby, an accident. When he was born, his older sister Sarah was 23 years old and already married. And his youngest sibling was a brother named John. He was 8 years old. And his birth is the only one out of all of his siblings that is not on record in Dedham, Massachusetts. His parents simply didn't record his birth. We only know his birthday because of an entry in a family Bible. There's almost no record of him having lived with his parents. In fact, they likely separated shortly after his birth. So his father's name was George Washington Snell, probably named after the first president because his father fought in the Revolutionary War. And George Washington met his future wife, Mary Lyon, while he was boarding at her house in West Roxbury, Massachusetts. George was renting a room there, and he was living with the family that had 4 unmarried daughters between the ages of 14 and 23. And it appears that George Washington was a bit of a scoundrel. He married Mary in 1820 when he was 23 years old and she was 16. And she was also 7 months pregnant when they got married. and they immediately moved out of the house. Mary's father died a year later from a heart attack, and we don't know whether it was because his second youngest daughter ended up getting pregnant and married before her two unmarried older daughters, but you can speculate that all you want. But George and Mary moved to Dedham, Massachusetts. They had 7 children together. They split up right after Charles was born. And George Washington moved back to his hometown in North Bridgewater, and Mary remained in Dedham with her kids. And there's no evidence whatsoever that George had any relationship with his kids after he left. And in fact, when he died, his obituary said that he had never been married and that he didn't have any children. So something happened to cause a rift between his kids and his wife and him. I don't know what it is. I'm still looking and searching to figure out what happened between them. But I have Charles's diary, and I also have his brother's diary. And on the day and year that their dad died, there's no mention of it at all in either of their diaries. So again, something happened there. So in childhood, Charles was raised by his older sisters, Sarah and Elizabeth, and he moved back and forth between their houses in Dedham and in Needham. But by 1860, he moved north to Bath, Maine. And the reason he did that is his brother George was working in a furniture company up there in Bath, and his wife died. So Mary and George and Charles moved up to Bath to help George take care of his young daughter, 2-year-old daughter, and that is how Charles Snell, who was born in Massachusetts in Dedham, ended up being in Bath, Maine at the age of 17 at the outbreak of the American Civil War. So this is the only photograph we have of my great-great-grandfather. And I have spent a lot of time looking at this photograph. I've been trying to track down when it was taken, just using clues in the photograph. And it's amazing what you can discover just looking at a photograph. So this is a cabinet card portrait, very common commercial photo format in the United States from 1870 to the 1890s. It's mounted on a stiff cardboard backing, very popular for the middle class people at that time. It was often exchanged, collected in albums. People would hang them in their parlors. And it's almost always included the photographer's studio, the stamp of it. And you can see down in the corner, it said Stillings there and an address. And this is Stillings Photography Studio. It was located at 56 Bromfield Street in Boston. And it was owned by a guy named Samuel V. Stillings. He was the photographer. And it just so happens that Charles owned an optometrist shop at the same address, 56 Bromfield Street. So he likely just walked across the hallway and got his picture taken by Samuel Stillings. So he died. My great great grandfather died of tuberculosis in July 21st of 1881. And you can see in the photograph, there's no really overt signs of the disease, no sunken cheeks or hollow eyes. So the photo was not taken in 1881. But his dress provides us with other clues. Like it's a business photograph. He's groomed and fashionable. He wears this sack coat, not a frock coat, but a sack coat with these narrow lapels, which was really in style in the late 1870s. The lapels actually widened in the 1880s. And he has this removable collar and a wide bow tie. And that puts the date of the photograph around 1878 or 79. And his mustache and his hairstyle were also very 1870s, late 1870s style. So an educated guess is the photograph was taken around 1878 to 1879, about 2 years before he died. But Charles was living in Bath when the Civil War started. And Company D of the Third Maine Infantry Regiment began recruiting in April of 1861. And Charles volunteered at the age of 18 and was sworn in to duty as a private on June 4th of 1861. These are Charles's diaries. He kept in a diary for the entire war. The first one is actually on the right. It's the thin one with the imitation leather cover. And the entries start there around 1861 and go through October of 1863. The second one is on the left, is in a dark bookbinder's cloth. And you can tell, you can see evidence on the cover that it once had a metal clasp on it. And that book starts around Halloween of 1863 and runs through March 28th of 1865. And they may look big on the screen here, but they're actually really small. They're 3 inches by 4.5 inches. Pocket size. The soldiers actually carried them in their frock coats, in their uniforms. So it's an amazing read. Reading the diary is really incredible. And some of the highlights from it, he fought at the Battle of Bull Run, the very first battle of the American Civil War. He fought in Fredericksburg, the Battle of Chancellorsville, the Battle of Gettysburg. The entry, the little diary entry on the side there is actually from July 2nd, 1863, when the Third Maine Infantry Regiment fought in the Peach Orchard at Gettysburg. And at the Battle of the Wilderness, he was actually captured and became a POW. And he spent time, over 7 months in prison at Andersonville Prison and at the Florence Stockade in North Carolina. And if you know anything about the Civil War, Andersonville Prison was a notoriously bad prison camp. It was actually a precursor to the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And the only person in the American Civil War that was ever brought up on war crimes was the gentleman that ran Andersonville Prison. But there's other highlights in the diaries as well. My grandfather sees Abraham Lincoln. He sees Mrs. Lincoln. He actually witnesses the execution of a deserter at the time. But one of my favorite features of the diary, one of these great details that you find when you're scouring documents, is on the last page of that dark cover diary. There's this crossed out section, and I don't know if you can read it on the slide, but it says Philadelphia, September 26, Charles Getchell, his book 1860, and then that last number you can't really read. Company D, Third Maine, Washington D.C. So this book, this diary, once belonged to Charles's company mate, Charles Getchell. And did Getchell give it to him? Did Charles buy it? But at some point, the two of them exchanged hands. And my great great grandfather crossed out his name, turned the book upside down, and started writing the diary from the back to the front. And Charles Getchell was a 24-year-old private from Wiscasset, Maine. He was the oldest son of a farm family. He survived the war. He served at the Third Maine, and then he actually volunteered for another 3 years with both the 17th Maine Infantry and the 1st Maine Heavy Artillery. But it's fascinating to me to have this little piece of graffiti in my great-great-grandfather's diary, because it also really piqued my curiosity. I decided I couldn't fully understand my great-great-grandfather's experience without understanding the men he served with in Company D. These are the men that he was surrounded by day and night for more than 3 years. They marched together, they conducted drills together, they slept together, they ate together, they talked, they complained, they fought, and they died next to each other. So I wanted to know more about them. So here's what Company D looks like on the surface. It was one of the original volunteer regiments from Maine. It mustered in on June 4th of 1861. It was the sister company to Company A. Many of the men from both Company A and D came from the Bath City Greys, which was a local militia in Bath. And I'm using the word militia here kind of lightly because the Bath City Greys are really more of a fraternal organization. It was centered around patriotism. They did some military drills. It was formed around 1850. But mostly they just marched in parades and they held charity balls. I'll show you a picture in a minute of their uniforms. It's really fancy. But more than 100 men from Bath were in the Bath Greys for the 10 years of his existence for the war, and lots of those guys went into companies A and D. Um, the first captain was a gentleman by the name of Charles A.L. Sampson, and he was a ship's carver. He actually made the prows, the figureheads on the prows of ships in Bath. He was really famous for his time, a really well-known wood carver. And a total of 152 men served as volunteers, draftees, and substitutes for Company D. And the top towns they came from were Bath, Woolwich, and Belfast. The oldest volunteer was a guy named Daniel Adams from Bowden, and the youngest was George Bliss from Bath. But I will say that the oldest and youngest come with a little bit of a caveat. You could only volunteer between the ages of 18 and 45. So there was a lot of older guys that wanted to serve and lied about their age, and they usually said that they were around 43 or 44. And then there was some younger ones at 17 that actually needed written permission from their parents to join. But on paper, Dan Adams and George Bliss are the oldest and youngest of the unit. And Company D mustered out on June 28th of 1864, and the remaining volunteers and draftees were absorbed by the 17th Maine Infantry Regiment. So here's that photo I was telling you about the Bath Grays. It's a possible photo. It's not 100% that this is somebody from the Bath Grays, but I believe it's a real photograph. I got it from the Bath Historical Society, and you can see the hat on his lap. It's got this big plume of feathers. And he's got these big uh, ornaments on the shoulders. And you can see that there's a white sash there at the bottom. Not a uniform that you would use for fighting, but a uniform that you use to march in a parade. So it wasn't enough to get into the surface of what was going on with Company D. So I went deeper. I decided I wanted to know every single one of the soldiers that was fighting with my great grandfather. Every one of the 152 soldiers. So I built out their family trees. I culled through census records, resident directories, military records. I found their pensions and their street addresses. I learned about their families, their wives, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and I went even deeper. I contacted their descendants. I found letters from them, diaries, wills. I sought out their photographs. I visited their grave sites and even toured the communities where they lived. And I did this until I had written out biographies on every single one of them. Hundreds of pages I had. Some of them left really clear footprints in the historical record, but others are really elusive. And I'm still hunting for information on lots of them. But I discovered something really amazing. These men lived fascinating lives, complicated, deeply human lives. That their stories are both ordinary and extraordinary. And that this one company, this Company D, in this one regiment, the Third Maine Regiment, had countless stories. That the entire Civil War, this whole period of time, you could really showcase that whole time through the stories of this one regiment. It's what historians sometimes call microhistory. But I also knew something else, that these stories were rapidly fading away, like diaries are being lost, letters being thrown out. And I decided that the way to save them was to share them, was to put them out there, put them in the public, and preserve them in that way. And that's really how the Company D podcast came about, telling stories to preserve and save them. So there's a podcast, a website, a bunch of social channels, doing talks like this one, some video content. Maybe someday there'll be a book. But that's what I want to do. I want to get these stories out there and saved. Um, and now I'd like to share two of my favorite stories from the past season. Two of the soldiers. So Shannon, I don't know if there's any questions so far. Happy to answer them.
Yeah, George, I've got a list of questions if you really seriously want to take them all. Yep. I've been
Sure.
writing them down as people send questions in, and there are a few. Let's see. Where was Andersonville Prison?
Georgia.
In Georgia. Okay.
Yes, it was in Georgia.
That's an easy one. And did your grandfather have his diary when he was there?
He did.
He
He had
did.
his diary there. He wrote it with a pencil. I don't know how he managed it. The entries, he was a very his entries are a very matter of fact.
Hmm.
Lots about marching. He doesn't spend a lot of time talking about his emotions in his diary, although when he does, it's really they're really heartfelt. But yes, he kept the diary through the entire time that he was in prison. The only time he missed was a short time in 1862 when he was shot, and I think it was a graze, and then he got sick, and he was in the hospital for a little while, and that's the only time he missed a couple of weeks during it.
That's incredible. That's a real treasure. Okay, so that's two of the questions. Where was Charles Sampson? Did he have a shop in Bath, the carver you mentioned?
Oh, Charles A.L. Sampson. That's a good question. I don't know if he had a shop.
Hmm.
I don't think he didn't sell retail.
Hmm.
He he was hired out by the different Bath at the time had dozens of shipbuilding I guess you call them factories or manufacturers right along the Kennebec River along Front Street. And they would hire him. They would be building boats for whoever contracted them. And whatever the boat name was, or the theme of the boat, he would carve it to spec, and it would go on the prow of the ship. And
Cool.
there's actually some still in existence. I'm doing a story about him in an upcoming episode, and I have some photographs of some of the prows that the figureheads that he did.
Wow.
They're beautiful. I mean, he
That's
was really
that's a
talented.
special art. Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. Okay. I've got two more questions. How did you research the clothing in the photo of Charles Snell?
the internet.
The internet. Okay.
Yes, yes, and I found there's lots of great resources about
Mhm.
fashion and clothing. That's a whole other side part of history, people studying the fashions at the time. And there's several great books about in the 19th century that I was able to get online and go through and figure out how to where what the different fashions were and to kind of match it up. And I actually talked to a woman a few years ago that helped me with that.
Cool. Very cool. Well, I thought that was neat. Okay, so then one person has asked just a couple like background questions about Company D. And the first one, which battles did they participate in? But you did list a few. But then the next question related was, do you know the casualty rates of the Third Maine and Company D?
Yes. I don't have it off time. I will get that for you. They
Okay.
did not have the highest casualty rate of the main regiments, but they did not have the least either. They were one of the original ones, and I think they're up at like 20 to 25%. I do know that when the Company D, when it rolled into a company is 100 men, a regiment is 1,000 men. When they got to Gettysburg, there were only 21 soldiers left in Company D out of the original 100. And the captain at the time, who I'm going to talk about next, was actually put in charge of four other companies because together they didn't even reach 100 companies, 100 men.
Okay, wow.
And it wasn't until a couple months later when the draft started in the United States that they were able to replenish um, the ranks of the Third Maine.
Thank you. And one more question came
Sure.
in. This is back to the photograph where you were looking at the clothing, and Bob asked, "Do you think his jacket could have been furnished by the photography studio?"
Maybe, but I doubt it. That generally wasn't something that the photography studios would do at the time. Have outfits and stuff like that. That was
Mhm.
something that you would come in with on your own. They did have the studios did have props and stuff like that, and backgrounds and backdrops.
All right. I think that's we you cleaned us out for questions for this first segment, but I'm here and waiting for more if
Awesome.
people have additional questions. Thank you.
Well, let's move on to Captain. Oh, here we go. Captain Alfred S. Merrill. He enlisted as a sergeant, got to the rank of lieutenant, and then became the third captain of Company D. And I've always had a real soft spot for Captain Merrill, maybe because he kind of looks the part really well if you look at the photograph of him. but also because his story is just really tragic. It's tough. So here are the two known photographs of Alfred S. Merrill. The first one is the most recent one taken. That was taken in the early 1864. It's a cabinet card photo, just like my great great grandfather's. And you can see he's dressed in a Union officer's frock coat. He's got those captain's insignia on his shoulders. He's got a full beard. He's well groomed. He's confident. He's got that. His hand is on what is probably supposed to be a Bible, what is probably just a prop that was in the photographer's studio. And the right hand photo is from earlier. It's probably pre-war, perhaps dating back to about 1858. And the uniform he's wearing in that one is not official Union garb. And you can see that he's wearing this sash that I pointed out that was on the Bath Gray uniform earlier. So this could be Alfred actually wearing his Bath City Grays uniform before the war. And you can notice that he's slimmer and he's got that, he doesn't have a mustache with his beard. He kind of looks like a Quaker to me in this photograph. So Alfred was the third captain, and he was the longest serving captain of Company D. And unlike his predecessors, he was not wealthy and he wasn't highly educated. Many of his letters are riddled with spelling errors, and he's got this strange syntax sometimes, which I can kind of relate to that at times. Um, he actually went west during the gold rush with hundreds of thousands of other men. He panned for gold in the Sierra Mountains for a couple of years with three of his brothers, but he did not strike it rich, and he came home back to Bath and settled there. He became a ship's carpenter, and he married a woman named Abby McIntosh, who was 14 years his junior, and they had a son together, Lewis. And Lewis unfortunately did not live to see his first birthday. He died as an infant in 1860. So Alfred would volunteer with Company D several months later in the spring of 1861. And one wonders about this decision, given the grief that he and his wife must have experienced losing their first and only child just a few months earlier. But it's likely that Alfred, like many other volunteers, didn't think that the war was going to last very long. Most of the Union volunteers thought that they would be home by the summer, that they would defeat the South and be home by August. And certainly they would be home before the holidays. And of course, that did not happen. And Alfred was a good soldier. He rose through the ranks and made captain in December of 1862. 1863, however, was not a good year for him. He was recovering from a gunshot wound at Fair Oaks, which was the heaviest fighting for the Third Maine so far in the war. And yet it would pale in comparison to what they were about to experience in Gettysburg and at the Battle of the Wilderness. But at Fair Oaks, they lost nearly one-third of the regiment, wounded, missing, or killed. And Alfred was one of the wounded. But even worse for him is that back home in Bath, his wife had been taking care of her sick sister, and her sister died. And a couple of months later, Abby died right after her. And given the time frame, it's likely that it was tuberculosis was the culprit here, but it could have been typhoid or diphtheria. But in the months leading up to the Battle of Spotsylvania in May of 1864, Captain Merrill was a man without a family. Both his wife and child were dead, and his three brothers, the three that he was closest to, were still living in California. Oh, sorry. Um, so Captain Merrill disappeared on May 7th, 1864. It just disappeared off the Spotsylvania battlefield. None of his fellow soldiers knew what happened to him. In the chaos of the fighting, no one even noticed he was gone until hours later when the company regrouped behind lines after the battle was over, and then nobody knew where he was. And the confusion over his fate is reflected in these news reports that I have on this slide in front of me. As the news trickled back to Bath, the newspapers were reporting on it. So on May 17th, the Bath Daily Sentinel and Times reported that he had been killed. And then a week later, they reported that he was supposed to be killed. Now, I don't even know technically what that means, supposed to be killed, but that's what they reported. And then a couple of days later, they changed that and they said that he was missing. And then on June 2nd, he was reported wounded and a prisoner. And then months later, after Company D had returned, um, his first lieutenant, Woodbury Hall, reported that he was either dead or still a prisoner, which did not really do much to clarify the situation, but that's what he said. And then the last report of him was in on August 24th of 1864, and they reported that he was mortally wounded and died close to where he fell. But none of these reports turned out to be accurate. All anyone really knew is that Captain Merrill just never came home. And in 1867, 3 years after the war ended, when Bath erected a monument to the Civil War dead, Alfred's name was actually etched into the granite of that monument as one of the fallen. But enter Amos Bean. So after years of research, looking for Captain Merrill, where could he possibly be? I came across Barry York, a descendant of Amos Bean, who was a private with Company E of the Third Maine. And Barry had an unpublished Civil War diary kept by Amos, kind of like I have an unpublished Civil War diary of my great-great-grandfather. And Barry generously shared it with me. And Amos, it turns out, was really prolific and a really colorful storyteller. He would have made a great podcaster. I'll tell you that much. But during that same combat where Merrill disappeared on May 7th of 1864, Amos was shot, not once, but 3 times. And he was taken prisoner by the Confederates. And how he managed to survive being shot 3 times is a minor miracle in and of itself. But he was held in this dilapidated old shack filled with wounded soldiers, mostly Confederate soldiers. And he was lying on this filthy straw mattress 3 days after he had been shot. He was in pain, but he had recently been given a glass of water and a piece of bread that was soaked in ham fat. So he's actually feeling better than he had in a couple of days. When he noticed this silhouette in the doorway of the hospital of the shack where he was. And that's when he was approached by a rebel hospital orderly carrying this bundle that included a book and some cufflinks. And he asked Amos if he fought with the Third Maine. And Amos said that he did. And he asked him if he knew who the captain of Company D was. And of course Amos did. So the orderly handed him the bundle, which were the last effects of Captain Alfred S. Merrill. The orderly told Amos that Merrill had been shot in the leg and taken prisoner. And he was at another shack for officers not far from where Amos was, but that he had died that morning, but not before he pled with the orderly to take his belongings and find any member of the Third Maine that he could and give it to them so that his effects could get home. So now has this bundle of a book, and I wish I knew what the book was. It might have been a diary or Bible, who knows? But Amos was a prisoner and he was shot and he ended up at Libby Prison. But he tried and tried. He wrote letters, and finally he found somebody that knew Merrill and knew the family, and he mailed the bundle back to Bath, but it never arrived. It got lost in the mail. Talk about what it must have said in that bundle. But the mystery of Alfred's disappearance was solved. On May 10th, 1864, he died of a gunshot wound in a Confederate field hospital while being held as a prisoner of war. This is the Merrill family grave marker. It's at Maple Grove Cemetery in Bath. And it looks like the whole family, Alfred, Abby, and their son Lewis, are buried together. But it's really unlikely that Alfred is actually there. There's just no evidence at all that his body ever made it back to Bath, Maine, and he's probably buried He was probably buried by the Confederates in an unmarked grave somewhere in Spotsylvania, which is sad. Wouldn't you love to know that he was with his wife and daughter at the end? But that's probably not the case. So that's the story of Alfred Merrill. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer them.
We had a couple of questions. First, I have to say that was a heartbreaking story at every turn. Thank you for sharing it. There were two questions. One is, were there others who went missing on the same day as Meryl?
Yes, there was a couple of other people that went missing. My great grandfather, actually 3 days later, was captured right before the during the Battle of the Wilderness, because the Battle of Spotsylvania kind of blended right into the Battle of the Wilderness. Um, yes, the Third Maine got hammered during this time. So if you try to put yourself in the place of the heads of the Union Army, so all of these 3-year regiments that volunteered in 1861, they were all coming to an end in June. That all those soldiers were going home. So they just fought in that May. It was almost fighting from the beginning to the end. The soldiers were just in almost a constant battle because they needed to get the most they could out of these men. Um, and because they were going home afterwards. But like my Merrill, I mean, technically Merrill went missing and killed 2.5 weeks before he was supposed to be released to go home for good.
That's rough.
That is rough.
And then it's just sad that they didn't know where he was. But so I'm curious, I guess, when you came across that in the diary, what was, did you just were you looking through the diary and you just found it? Is that what happened? How did you know that you were going to learn about Meryl?
I did not know I was going to learn about Merrill at that time. So when I'm doing my research, I am researching literally dozens of soldiers at the same time, and I have, I'm on Ancestry, Family Search, and all of these other databases. And anybody that is putting information in that I don't have, I write them
Mhm.
and I ask them where I could. But I actually met Barry through a contact at one of the Civil War parks down in Virginia. He put me in contact with Barry. I called him. We had a great conversation. Then we ended up, exchanging emails, and he sent me the diary. So, Bean's diary has other stories in it other than Merrill.
Okay, so you came across that and said, this answers one of my questions.
Yes.
That's amazing. Just as the Lincoln County Historical Association, I would just like to say it makes you think, all of you who have your old family journals and diaries on shelves and attics. We do hope that you'll find a way to record them
Yes.
and keep them available for research. Okay, so there was one other question that came in during that last segment, and it was the Third Maine under the command of General Sickles?
No.
Okay.
It was under the command, the two colonels of the Third Maine Regiment were Oliver O. Howard, who then got promoted, and Howard is attached to Howard University.
Mhm. Dan
And
Bowdoin College.
yes,
Mhm.
and then Moses Lakeman, and the stories about Moses Lakeman are great, but they'll have to wait for another time. But those are the two men that were in charge of the regiment during the Third Maine's time. Sickles was actually the head of a brigade that had, I think, about 4 or 5 different regiments at the time.
Thank you. We'll leave it there for now.
Okay. So here's another one of my favorite stories from season one. This is about the Kennison brothers, Albin and James. And this is a whole new definition of sibling rivalry because one of them fought for the South and the other fought for the North. This is a Civil War cliche really come to life here in Maine. Brother versus brother, North versus South, Union versus Rebel. Here it is. So I will tell you a little bit about Albin first. Um, he's the oldest. He was born in Windsor, Maine on April 24th of 1830. He moved to Bath as a young man and worked as a ship's carpenter. And as you can see, there are lots of ship carpenters fought with Company D. And he married a woman named Josephine Flint. And Josephine came from a broken home in Thompsonton, Maine. So Thompsonton was a literal boom town at this time. The population had doubled between 1830 and 1840. It was another one of these shipbuilding powerhouses in Maine. And fun fact about Thompsonton, in 1840, two of the seven millionaires in the United States lived in Thompsonton. This is back in the days when the idea of a billionaire probably would have just blown people's minds to pieces. But Josephine and Albin had three children. Um, Albin was a really good soldier. He rose to the rank of sergeant, and he too was wounded at Fair Oaks, but it was a minor injury. He was probably grazed by a bullet. In May of 1863, during the Battle of Chancellorsville, he so distinguished himself on the battlefield that he was awarded the Kearney Medal of Valor and had the medal pinned on his chest at an outdoor ceremony by General Daniel Sickles. In the winter of 1863, he actually volunteered for another 3 years of service as a veteran volunteer, and he received extra pay for that. And he got a month-long furlough, and he went back to Maine and Bath and visited his family for that month. But unfortunately, when he got back, he was transferred to the 17th Maine Infantry Regiment, and in June, he was shot in the ankle. And I mean, right off, he probably with the regiment for a week or two. He probably didn't even know the names of his superiors or his fellow soldiers by the time he got shot. And it was a very gruesome injury, as you'll see in a minute. So his right ankle had to be amputated, but an infection set in, and he had to have a second operation, and they had to remove his entire right leg and his entire right arm. And he lasted 4 days after that operation, and then he died on August 4th of 1864. So this is the only known image of him. I really love this picture of him. I'm probably dating myself here, but he reminds me of Tom Selleck during his Magnum PI days. He's got that just a great mustache. And he also knows he's really got these small feet too, which it's a little odd for his size. But he's wearing an official U.S. Army uniform, not a dress uniform, but this is the field operations uniform. You can see the sergeant chevrons on his sleeves. And in these types of photographs, officers were often posed like Merrill was, leaning or standing, using props. And privates were often sitting or sitting down. But sergeants like Kennison, they often put them in these poses, like confident and self-possessed and really authoritative, because really sergeants were the backbone of any company. So this picture was taken around 1864, probably shortly after he had been promoted. So now let's talk about his little brother, James. So James was 7 years younger than him. He's actually really the middle child, and we all know what the middle child can be like. So we don't know why he moved to Alabama, but in the late 1850s, he ended up in Baldwin County. It was probably shipbuilding that brought him down there. The shipbuilding companies in Bath, they had really close business ties with the South, particularly in New Orleans and in Mobile. And so there were in the census records in 1860. There's lots of other Maine men that are in that area too. So I think we can assume that he went down there for business because for a job as a carpenter or working for one of those companies. But he rented rooms at a farm owned by Thomas Dean, and Dean's wife was named Mary Ann Catrett, whose brother John owned a farm nearby. And now we're going to have some similarities between my family and the Kennerson family here, because this is where it gets a little awkward. John had a daughter, a teenage daughter named Elizabeth, that lived on the farm. And James married Elizabeth on June 4th of 1861, after the South had already seceded from the United States, and 2 months after the Confederates had already bombed Fort Sumter in South Carolina. James was 22 years old, and Elizabeth was 14, and she was also pregnant. And he had to sign a marriage bond with Elizabeth's father, saying that he would pay the family $200 if he didn't marry Elizabeth. So this had all the markings of a shotgun wedding. Even by the standards of rural Alabama at the time, Elizabeth was very young to be getting married, and and obviously being pregnant that young, it was deeply stigmatized back then. And 3 months after the wedding, James volunteered for Company I of the 1st Regiment Mississippi Cavalry, known as Wood's Regiment. He was now a rebel soldier. He's on the opposite side of the fight from his brother. And although they never faced each other on the battlefield, Albin really fought in Northern Virginia, and James fought mostly in Mississippi. But they were one was a Confederate and one was a Union soldier. And there's no record. I would love to find a letter or something, but there's no record of what his family thought about him enlisting in the Confederate Army. But with Albin and another one of their brothers, Newman, fighting for Company D of the Third Maine, we can only imagine that the family was not all that happy with him fighting. But after the war, after his brother was killed, James went back to Alabama to his teenage bride and his now 2 sons, but he didn't stay there long. He moved back to Maine, came back to Bath, and he took Elizabeth and his 2 sons with him. But Elizabeth hated Maine, probably couldn't believe how cold it was after living in Alabama all her life. And the marriage ended poorly. Elizabeth moved back to Alabama in the early 1870s and took her 2 sons with her. They never officially divorced, or there's no evidence that they actually ever officially divorced. In fact, when Elizabeth got back to Alabama, she told everybody that she was a widow, that James had died. And she ended up marrying a second time to a much younger first cousin of hers. And they had 6 kids together. She became a devout Baptist. And when she died in 1909 at the age of 62, there's no mention of her first marriage at all to James Kennison in her obituary. It's as if she erased that entire part of her life. And this is a picture of her, probably taken sometime in the 1890s. It's her with her 5 daughters, taken in Alabama. And as for James, he also remarried. He had 5 more children, and we don't know if he ever saw his southern sons ever again. But throughout his years in Maine, he claimed that he had been forced into the Confederacy by Elizabeth's parents, that he didn't volunteer, that they made him go in. Now, we don't know if that's true or not. We only have his word for it. But we do know that his family forgave him. He lived in Bath on the same street as his parents, and his brother Newman, who was a wounded veteran who actually served with Albin in Company D, he and Newman actually went into business together. They had a caulking business together. James died in 1916, and his service in the Confederacy at the end of his life and in his obituary was treated really as this kind of curiosity, this weird thing. And the obit actually claimed that he and Newman faced off on the battlefields, but that never happened. What there is no mention of, however, in his obituary or anywhere else, is about his brother Albin, who was killed by the Confederates and buried at Arlington National Cemetery. And that's probably because that is an inconvenient fact, an uncomfortable fact, particularly on this slightly offbeat and humorous story that they were saying about this Yankee Confederate facing his brother in battle. But it's also an example of one of the many ways after the war that the North and South attempted to reconcile. They really downplayed the violence and the actual horrors of the war. So this is James is cemetery stone. And as far as I can tell, he is the only Confederate soldier buried in Bath, Maine. It's an Oak Grove cemetery. And on a side note, James's youngest daughter, her name was Ida Mae Oliver, lived in Bath for her entire life. And she lived until the age of 76 years old. She died in 1963. The daughter of a Confederate soldier living in Bath, Maine, when the Beatles were at the top of the charts, JFK was president, and humans had gone into space for the first time. And I just find that kind of an amazing timeline. So I don't know if there's any questions about the Kennersons.
There sure are. Um, First, a couple comments, and one is Bob Green, who is a wonderful historian in his own right, is on the talk, and he just wanted to add that Oliver Otis Howard was from Leeds, was the head of the Freedmen's Bureau and the general in charge of the U.S. soldiers that fought Chief Joseph, who's known for saying, "I will fight no more forever." So just a little helpful.
That is a good ad.
Yep. And then the other one is, I think a gentle correction, but I might not be right. You mentioned a town called Thompsonton, and some
Yes.
of our Mainers think you might mean Thomaston, and we're wondering.
Thomaston, yes.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Sure.
Well, that will get to what I have to say about my learnings. And
Okay.
one of those
Great.
learnings is pronouncing Maine
Yep.
cities, towns, and counties.
Well, you got 75 people, 75 other people on this chat, or on this Zoom, and I imagine many
I
of
have
them.
been corrected many times before.
Well, okay. So, the what other question that came up is, why did James move south in the first place? Did you get that?
It's funny. I did a lot of my research with another gentleman that is from Alabama and has family in the Kennerson family down there, and we've been trying to figure out exactly why he went down there. I think the closest that we've come is that Bath had all these connections with the South because of shipbuilding, and there were lots of Mainers living in that area at the time, and one of the shipbuilding uh, manufacturers probably had a facility down there for wood or something like that that they were shipping it back up north. That's why I think he was there.
That makes a ton of sense. Thank you. Yeah, this group has had all kinds of questions, but we'll let you get to your next
Sure.
section.
So I figured I'd end this discussion with a few of the challenges and some of the rewards from doing a project like this one. And as I said before, pronouncing Maine names, towns, rivers, counties, woof. Yes, that has been a challenge. Shannon has volunteered to help me as I get ready for season two, so I can pressure test some of it as well. Because I think I know it because I've spent lots of time in Maine, but I'm actually from Massachusetts originally. Um, and I think I know what the pronunciation is, but then you get to the people that actually live in the town, and they pronounce it completely differently. So I'm going to do better on that, I promise. And then dead zones. As a former journalist, this really drives me nuts. Like there's gaps in newspaper coverage. For example, in Bath, the newspapers, they didn't have a newspaper for a few years until 1862. So there's this big gap there. And Bath also had this fire in the town hall and lost like decades worth of birth and marriage notices. Really, and that's happened all over the place. Fires destroyed a lot of records, leaving lots of gaps. And then the personal documents, the letters, the diaries, they're stuck in attics, and even worse, people throw them away. And just to echo what Shannon was saying before, you might have all these old papers in your attic that belong to relatives. You should donate those to your local historical societies because you don't think they're worth anything, but oh my God, they are gold for people that are doing research and trying to figure out what was going on. So please donate those. And then gatekeeping, really weird, but lots of people are very protective about their families and their community history. So you have to sometimes navigate your way around that. And hopefully tell people that you're just you're looking for the truth. You're looking for the stories. And lots of people can get upset if there's something negative said about their or what they perceive as negative. And I try to tell them, I'm trying to build a human being here, and all of us are just flawed, and no one is perfect. And people come alive much more when you tell the full story about who they are. But the rewards are much greater than the challenges. Um, and I feel a project like this is really creative. You're building something, a podcast, a website, something with purpose. And I also really enjoyed just connecting with my own family history. My father and I, the last few years of his life, really got close because we were researching our family together. And it's some of my best memories of my dad. Driving up to Maine, going to graveyards and history societies, going into libraries together. It was great. And I love meeting people that are just as passionate about history and genealogy and remembering the past. It's really fun to meet people like that. And then, most of these soldiers that I'm talking about, they're nearly forgotten. And yet they sacrificed almost everything. And their lives are just clinging in these fragments, cemetery markers and old photographs and pieces of paper. And we often forget how full and complicated and complex the human lives can be. So I feel like bringing these men back to life as best as I can, it does feel like a calling, because I do think that these soldiers deserve to be remembered. So thank you for being part of that remembrance tonight. It was really a pleasure to speak to you all. And I'd like to take some questions, but I also would just like to thank Shannon again for having me here. I'd also like to thank the J. Edward Knight Insurance for supporting the Lincoln County Historical Society and this series. I think it's great that they're doing that. So I really appreciate that. And if you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to hear from you. And if you're too shy, you can always reach me at companydpodcast@gmail.com. Send me a note. I will answer as best as I can.
And I'll say if you're too shy to reach out to him, you can email me and I'll pass it on as well. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, really good, and I've gotten
Thank you.
tons of good feedback already. It's already after 6:30. Are you sure you have time for a little more?
Yeah, I'll stay as long as anybody has a question.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's see. We'll dive in then. Okay. Now my notes are messy, but okay. Despite not having kept the diary after the wars, do you have a sense of George's past post-war experience? And could you share some of that?
Yes, I actually also have a binder, like a scrapbook that he kept, where he did clippings, put in obituaries, interesting news stories, and things like that. I know that he married. He married, had 3 kids. He owned an optometrist shop. He actually also owned a candy store, if you can believe it, for a little while. But he actually didn't live that all that long after the war. He died in 1881. His health was never the same. When he got back from Andersonville prison and the stockade, he was in prison for 7 months. And when he got back, he had lost a lot of weight. He couldn't walk for weeks afterwards. His legs got all swelled up, and he recovered in Bath, but he walked for the rest of his life with a cane. And he just never got his full health back afterwards. But he met a woman. He got married and had 3 kids. He seemed to do well for himself, although he did not have a long life.
Thank you. And then two more questions about him. Do you know if he joined the Third Maine Regimentary Association or the Grand Army of the Republic?
He did. He was a GAR member, but he belonged to a one in Boston.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So a little bit more about you and your research. A couple people have mentioned that it would be interesting to know if you're posting names anywhere for people who you're doing research on, in case there are people out there who already know these people and know their stories.
That is a great idea, and I will do so. As I'm gearing up for season 2, I already have the 10 soldiers that I know that I'm going to work on, and I will certainly put their names up, and also I can put up the names of the most of the 152 soldiers. And if you know anybody that has any ancestors with the Third Maine and Company D, please let me know. I would I'd be so happy to meet them and to be able to talk with them.
Great. And now that you and I have a connection, then you're always happy. I mean, I'm always happy to pass
Oh,
questions
thank
on
you.
to our
Yeah,
members.
you're already helping me with a mystery already.
Oh yeah, I've already put that out there.
Yes.
Okay, and so back to you, you and your research and your work. This is I'm going to put two questions into one, but it sounds like you have a background in journalism, and now you clearly have a passion for preservation. So the questions are, what more specifically is your background in journalism? Where were you working? What were you doing? And was it tied to preservation?
It was not. I was a general assignment reporter at the Worcester Telegram and Gazette in Massachusetts. I was there for 10 years. I worked at a couple of smaller dailies and weeklies in Massachusetts. And I left there around 1999 and went into consulting after that, and got into digital media and marketing and things like that. Although I always say that the dumbest thing I ever did was to leave journalism, because I really enjoyed being a newspaper reporter.
So now you're doing reporting on something else, kind of
Yes,
enjoying
yeah.
that. So what about the preservation impulse? What do you think makes you so inspired to, you to me, as someone who's a preservationist, you sound like you've been, dedicated to preservation for a long time. I can tell it's something you really care about.
Yes, I really, because and doing this project, I just realized how fragile it all is. Like the entire world that I am talking about right now is gone. It's all gone, except there's these remnants of it left. But all the people that lived in the 19th century don't, they're gone now. And I feel like that happens with every generation, and it behooves us. I mean, I really believe in the power of history. And I think that that the quote about we're doomed to repeat history is so true because people just don't know their own histories. Like I have three daughters, and I am sometimes horrified at at their knowledge of history, and I'm trying to rectify that because I do think history is very important. It just puts things in context.
Absolutely. Well, you're probably talking to a whole bunch of people who agree with you, but um,
Probably.
Anne has asked, could you explain how one might begin the process of discovering histories of those Civil War dead in the cemetery on her own family's property? She knows
Mhm.
many were killed at Gettysburg.
Oh wow. Yes. I started with what we had in my family, but I'll tell you some really great resources for you to consider. I would consider FamilySearch.com. It's free and it's really good. It's got you, so you enter in the names of the people that you know, and you put it in there, and it'll help you figure out who these people are. And if you have the dates and things like that, it can really almost self-build because you're building on what other people have done before you. And Ancestry.com, another great resource, although that is paid. That is more paid. So I'd start with Family Search. Fold 3 is really good. It focuses on military history. I would certainly recommend that. The National Archives is great. Your local historical society is an excellent place. I find my best stuff there. And I also use the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Although I would not recommend going through them officially, they are slow and they're really expensive. So to get a pension record from um, the National Archives costs like $95. But you can hire people um, that have little small businesses down there, and they'll do it for you for like $40. Um, so I would recommend going that route, and they do it fast. They can get it in a couple of weeks if you wait for the National Archives. They'll usually take a few months, and they've been plagued by the government shutdowns. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of layoffs under this administration at the archives. So they're way understaffed, and things are taking a lot longer to be found.
Thank you. That was pretty comprehensive and hopefully helps Anne on her way. I'm putting in the chat a couple suggestions of talks that address this conversation about connections between people in Maine and people in the South. And if you have a chance to look into those are fantastic.
Oh yeah,
If you missed
yeah,
those
that's
tonight,
great.
reach
Yeah,
out to
Bat
me.
had
Yeah.
just a lot of the wealthier folks in Bath that owned the shipbuilding and some of the big industries had houses and family in New Orleans. And in the next season I'm doing, I talked about the Kennerson family. There's actually another soldier with Company D whose brother fought for the South, and they were actually on the same battlefield together. So that's a story I'm working on now.
Cool. Well, I think that we've got to wrap it up, but I have one question, a burning question of my own. What is the current project you're most excited about, and are you willing to tell us a little bit about it as a teaser for your
Yes,
season of
yeah,
podcasts?
yes. It's probably the story of the one that you've been helping
Oh
with.
yeah, yep.
Bainbridge Brown is his name, and he was from Bodenham. And the oral history around him is that he was a gay soldier, and he deserted in 1862, and he went home to Bodenham, and he went hunting with his uncle, and his uncle ended up killed, shot, what they called a hunting accident. And Bainbridge ended up, he was a photographer, ended up moving down to Boston, went to Bath, Portland, then Boston. And he came back to Bodenham in the, I don't know the date off the top. It was in the 1880s sometime. And he went hunting with a bunch of his cousins and he ended up dead. And I can find no record of his death anywhere other than his stone, his cemetery stone that is in Bodenham. And I've been working with the historical society there, and they say that the family lore is that he was killed as revenge for killing his uncle, and several of his cousins actually right after his death moved to California. So that's a crazy story that I'm trying to figure out some of the moving parts around that one.
Yeah. Well, you definitely caught my attention. Thank you so much, George. This was really, really good, really interesting. A lot of people appreciated it, enjoyed it,
Oh,
and
my pleasure. Thank you
yeah.
so much for having me.
Yeah, and I hope we're in touch. I'm looking forward to seeing what you put out next. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone, for coming. I will be sending out the recording of this lecture probably next week for those of you who need to go back and check it out again. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you again.
Take care.